One of the biggest mysteries of Breath of the Wild begins as soon as you start the game. Who is this Link? Why has he been asleep for 100 years? How has Hyrule become so corrupted? Where does this game take place on the official timeline? I'll be showing you evidence that suggests this could be in any of the known timelines, and finally giving you an overwhelming amount to prove which timeline the game will actually take place in. So be sure to stick around until the end of the video to find out for yourself. And please remember to click that subscribe button to show support, so I know to continue these videos.
In Breath of the Wild, Link wakes up after being asleep for at least 100 years. This leads many to believe that this Link is a Link returning from a previous game. Usually Nintendo mentions that a game will take place roughly 100 years after a previous game, like in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess being 100 years after Ocarina of Time, Spirit Tracks being 100 years after Wind Waker, etc. So this isn't anything new. However, Link being asleep for this long is. In every example, when a game takes place a long time after a previous game, we're introduced to a new Link. It's only when games come immediately after the events of a previous game that we reuse an older Link. A few examples being the A Link to the Past Link reappearing in the Oracle games and Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass.
However, in Breath of the Wild, this Link isn't introduced as a brand new reincarnation of the hero. We're only told he has been asleep for 100 years, and this is why people suspect him to be a returning Link. So which Link is it? Well, this brings us to the next question. Where does this game take place on the timeline? The question is a bit tricky as it's possible for this game to take place on any of the timelines. A lot of people correlate the advanced technology in this game to the advanced robots seen in Skyward Sword, leading many to believe that Link from Skyward Sword warned everyone of the cursed demise placed on Zelda, Link, and himself to be reincarnated in an endless cycle. So, in fear of demise returning and not being able to save the world, the Sheikah put Link in the same sleep state that Zelda was in during Skyward Sword to seal demise. This time, not to seal anyone, but to be reawakened when the time was right. Then, Impa gathered other members of the Sheikah tribe to travel around Hyrule, now that it's free of demise and any evil, to set up all of the shrines and had the other members of the Sheikah tribe to remain waiting for a true hero. This is why after completing a shrine, you find an elderly member of the Sheikah that look incredibly similar to how Impa looked while guarding Zelda.
The next timeline is the Child Timeline. A lot of people believe Breath of the Wild falls in this timeline because of statements directly from Aonuma. During an interview, Aonuma said that while playing this new Zelda game, he will be reminded of Twilight Princess HD. Now why would he say this if it wasn't somehow related? I mean, we even have Wolf Link making an appearance. This brings us back to my statement earlier about how Nintendo gave us hints as far back as 2010. If you remember, back when Ocarina of Time 3D was released, the remake had some changes made to it that showed off hints at future titles. We have seen obvious artwork in random places that showed off Skyward Sword, and we had books in several locations that had Sheikah symbols on the front. It is possible that even way back then, Nintendo had a concept on what they were going to work on after Skyward Sword. However, instead of a magic book with the Sheikah symbol on it, we have a tablet with the symbol.
Now, if we take a look at changes made in Twilight Princess, the most obvious that doesn't seem to fit is the carvings on the wall featuring the Rito tribe, which should not belong in the Child Timeline as they've been only present in the Wind Waker, unless the change is a deliberate hint at what to expect from Breath of the Wild. We also see what appears to be screenshots of the game making appearances, just as the Skyward Sword artwork did in Ocarina of Time's remake.
Could these changes be a clue that this new game falls 100 years after Twilight Princess HD? I personally have not been able to find the original footage. A few people have said that Aonuma himself mentioned that the game takes place after Twilight Princess, but again, I cannot confirm this. The next timeline we look at is the adult timeline. The theory here is just as the seal on demise in Skyward Sword or Ganondorf at the end of Ocarina of Time, a seal will weaken over time and be broken. The seals from the sages and goddesses are very powerful, but not permanent. This is why we see Demise breaking loose as the imprisoned in Skyward Sword, and Ganondorf returning in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess after being sealed. So the seal placed on Hyrule by the goddesses to flood out all evil can also weaken and be broken. Not only that, but we also see the lovable Koroks return in Breath of the Wild, who we all know had the plan to plant trees everywhere to soak up all the water covering Hyrule. So, with knowing seals weaken over time and an entire race devoted to breaking it, it is entirely possible that this game takes place after Wind Waker. probably around the same time as Spirit Tracks, but where Spirit Tracks takes place in New Hyrule, this game takes place at the exact same time, but in an unflooded Old Hyrule. The final timeline, and the one that I personally believe this game falls into, is the Downfall Timeline. As explained in previous timeline theories, Breath of the Wild could logically fall into any of them. However, we have an almost overwhelming amount of evidence that suggests this is the true timeline for the game, and who Link really is.
This Link is the hero of time from Ocarina of Time. I believe Nintendo gave hints to this with the clues inside of Ocarina of Time 3D, which I'll get into later. First, notice the same blue earrings worn by this Link and the one in Breath of the Wild.
But wait, the hero of time died fighting Ganon, and that caused the Downfall timeline. Well, technically yes, but what if he didn't actually die? What if, at the very last moment when all was doomed to fail, Zelda, the sages and the goddesses placed a seal on Link? Instead of sealing a weakened Ganon in the Sacred Realm like in the adult timeline, they used their magic to seal and save Link.
This would mean that Breath of the Wild takes place roughly 100 years after Ocarina of Time, and sometime before Link to the Past. Hyrule Historia calls this era the Sealing War or the Imprisoning War, but we have no game that falls in this era, yet. This is why we see Link awakening in the Chamber of Resurrection. He was sealed in this chamber and placed in a deep sleep until he was able to fully recover or resurrect.
This brings to question, if Link was sealed during the final battle before he was defeated, what happened to Ganon? It could be possible that just as Link was sealed, so was Ganon, but not in the Sacred Realm. Instead, he was trapped inside of Hyrule Castle where the battle took place. Although Link did lose this battle, it is unknown how badly Ganon was injured. He could have been weakened just enough for the sages or the goddesses to successfully seal him as well, even if it was just for a short time. One of the things that helps prove this theory is the Temple of Time. It looks almost identical to the temple found in Ocarina of Time. This would mean that Hyrule Castle was destroyed and overrun by Ganondorf. And it would make sense for the Temple of Time to be destroyed as well.
It's even stated on page 96 of Hyrule Historia that the Temple of Time fell into decay, which, as we can see, it's in ruins. However, the Master Sword which is usually found in this temple is nowhere to be found. This can easily be explained.
We know two things about the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild. One, it is located in a forested area, and two, it is incredibly damaged and weathered. But how can it have been so damaged? Well, what could damage it more than a fight with the King of Evil himself, Ganon? It would make sense that if the sword would become damaged, it would be so during a battle with the most powerful being in Hyrule. However, if Link is defeated or sealed as this theory suggests, what would happen to the Master Sword? One would think that Ganon may lay claim to it, but remember, Ganon is also sealed as we see in the trailer for Breath of the Wild, and with the Temple of Time being destroyed, the only safe place would be to hide the sword where no one could find it. And what better place than the Lost Woods? A place where anyone without a fairy will change into a Skull Kid, and only a very select few know how to successfully navigate it. Next, we have an interview from Nintendo, known as the meeting with the Happy Mask Salesman to promote Majora's Mask 3D. The Happy Mask Salesman states that he may return in a future Zelda game. This leads many to believe that Breath of the Wild is that game that he was referring to. If he does appear, this brings strength to the theory that the game takes place in the Downfall timeline. He is known for being in every game featuring the Hero of Time so far, and his only other appearance was in the Oracle games, which also happened to take place in the Downfall timeline. A few naysayers might bring up what I mentioned earlier about the Koroks, but if the Kokiri are able to evolve into the Koroks or the monkeys from Twilight Princess because of a threat, what is more of a threat than Ganondorf taking over Hyrule?
The final nail in the coffin here is upon release of the official timeline, fans have always seen the Downfall timeline as a cop-out, since theoretically Link can die at any given point of any given game. So does each death create another split? Also, fans have been begging for a third Hero of Time game. Well, Nintendo, recently more than ever, have been talking about how they are listening to fan feedback. So this would be a perfect way to please everyone. Nintendo gets to create another game using the most iconic reincarnation of Link and fix the biggest complaints about the official timeline. If Link didn't die, but he and Ganon were both sealed away by Princess Zelda, the sages and the goddesses. This could have created such a strong force that it is actually what caused the split.
Finally, every 3D Zelda we can see is an origin story for their respective timeline. First, we have Ocarina of Time, which causes the split timeline and its direct sequel Majora's Mask. We have Wind Waker, which begins the adult timeline. We have Twilight Princess, which begins the child timeline, and we have Skyward Sword, which begins the unified timeline. And the only thing left is for a 3D game being an origin for the downfall timeline.